Well, hey, good morning, you guys. Good morning. Happy Sunday after Christmas. And when Kirk asked me to preach, it was like, okay, what do you preach the Sunday after Christmas, right? Because we just kind of got done with a little mini Advent series. We've been in Powerful People, and so just trying to weigh that out. And so I asked him about his Powerful People stuff. How many of you have been enjoying that, by the way? What a great series and great timing for that, leading into the new year here. And it's all about, not being a victim between your ears, as Kirk Snaza has so elegantly said. And so I kind of want to riff on that a little bit again this morning, and just try to launch into maybe this idea of what a renewed mind actually is. Okay, and so I want to kick off this WWJT series for you today. And WWJT is just my acronym. It means, what would Jesus think? Okay, a long time ago in a land far, far away called the 90s, you used to get those WWJD bracelets. Okay, and wife, are you wearing yours this morning? She's not wearing hers this morning. Okay, that's all right. She has one. But it's this idea that if I want to change the way I act. I don't know if you know this or not, okay? If I want to change the way that I act, I can't start there. I have to change the way that I think first, okay? And so it's learning about how to steward the mind of Christ is basically what I want to talk about, because I don't know if you know this or not, but you have the mind of Christ. Paul tells us that in 1 Corinthians 2:16. That you have the mind of Christ. Actually, he says, but you have the mind of Christ. And it's this idea that we've been given this mind of Christ. But how many of you have ever been given something that you've never quite used? Anybody get something for Christmas that you're looking at like, I don't know when I'm ever going to use this, but I don't know if I can take it back. I don't know if I can return it. And so then it goes into a storage room, right? Okay. The storage room of misfit toys, right? And it's this idea that we've been given this, but just because we've given it, just because we have it, it doesn't necessarily mean that we always use it. And it doesn't mean that we always use it how we're supposed to use it, right? And so that's what I want to spend some time in talking about today for sure, all right? And so failed resolutions. Anybody experience a failed New Year's resolution before? Okay, all the time. I like that. And it's this idea that you can't change your actions. Where we get wrong with resolutions is we try to change our actions. But you can't change your actions unless you change your thinking. You have to change your thinking if you want to change your actions, right? And so a lot of times we have this new year, new you kind of mentality. But the reality is Jesus already made you new. Okay, remember Nicodemus? Nicodemus comes and sees Jesus one night, and he asks Jesus, what's the secret to the kingdom? How do I get into heaven kind of thing? And do you remember what Jesus' answer was to him? The only way you can get into the kingdom of heaven is you must be born again. Born again, okay? It's this idea that Jesus has already made you new. He's made a born-again version of you. The problem is we have this tendency to revert back to our old version, okay? Because we get lost in our negative thought patterns and stuff like that. And so the upgrade's been made available, okay? That's, I guess, what I'm trying to hit at here is the upgrade's been made available, but we tend to revert to the old versions of ourselves. All right, so there was this band in the 90s that was called Sister Hazel, okay? Maybe you heard Sister Hazel. John, I'm looking at you. Did you ever listen to the band Sister Hazel? Or how about Blues Traveler? Did you listen to Blues Traveler? Oh, he's shaking his head. No, dang it. All right, and so anyway, Blues Traveler was the more popular version than Sister Hazel. But Sister Hazel had this great song, and I remember rocking out to the chorus of this song, and it was this idea, if you want to be somebody else, if you're tired of fighting battles with yourself, if you want to be somebody else, you need to change your mind, okay? But that was a retweet, okay? Paul already wrote that. Remember Romans 12:2? Okay? Paul writes this to the Romans. He says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, this old way of thinking, the old version of yourself, but rather be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And it got me thinking that if I want to live the way Jesus lived, which is the gospel, okay? That's the gospel, to live the way Jesus lived. That's the gospel in a nutshell, to live the way Jesus lived. If I want to live the way Jesus lived, though, I need to first think the way Jesus thought. Now, how many of you know that that's a tall order, right? And that's not easy. And it's not something that you accomplish in an evening or in a prayer service, okay? Or in a tent revival. It's something that is a process. Thank you for that word about process this morning, Babe and Marnie. Okay? And it's this idea that we are a work in progress. And so if I want to live the way Jesus lived, I need to change the way that I think. Steve Backlund, who I've already quoted this morning, but he says this. He says, we're saved when we believe in Jesus, but we're free when we believe like Jesus. Okay? And it's this idea that believing in Jesus is what gets you saved, but believing like Jesus is how you live a free life. And that's the idea. That's the idea in this WWJT series that I'm trying to hit at, is we need to change the way we think by thinking the way Jesus thought. All right, and so follow the trail. Follow the trail. I talked about this a while back when I taught a sermon on the mind field. Pause for a brief water refill. It's this idea that behavior follows belief. What does that mean? Okay, well, have you ever done something you know you shouldn't have done? Okay, I'm looking over there in the nosebleed section. Okay, Taylor, have you ever done something you know you shouldn't have done? Okay, still in the nosebleed section. Elliot, have you ever said something you know you shouldn't have said, right? And the reality is I don't need to just look in the nosebleeds to know this, right? We've all done something we know we shouldn't have done. We've all said something we know we shouldn't have said. But the reality is follow the trail, because those things, doing something you know you shouldn't have done, saying something you know you shouldn't have said, they will always lead back to a thought that you should have never thought or thunked. Okay? If I say something I know I shouldn't have said, if I do something I know I shouldn't have done, those will always lead me back to thoughts I know I should have never thought. All right? Paul writes to us this in 2 Corinthians 10:5. He says, he's talking to the Corinthian church, he says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. Pause. What's the knowledge of God? Well, it's what God knows. The knowledge of God is everything that God knows. And what happens is we oftentimes get stuck in thought patterns and that disagree with what God already knows. Okay? And if I think I've said this here, maybe I haven't said this here, but if I'm anxious about something, right? And Jesus isn't anxious about anything, what does he know that I need to know? Okay? Because if I'm anxious, I am following arguments and pretensions that have set themselves up against what God knows. That's what Paul is saying here. The knowledge of God is what God knows. And so if anything that I'm experiencing is in contradiction to that, I need to take that thought captive and I need to root it out. I just talked to you a little bit ago about how I shouldn't say that you don't have permission, okay, because you can do what you want to do. But if you walk out the doors today feeling hopeless, okay, don't, okay? Because we have permission to be hopeless about anything that God is hopeless about, right? And so if I'm hopeless about any area of my life, what does God know? Because he's not hopeless. What does he know that I need to know, right? And so I'm going to take captive every thought and I'm going to make it obedient to Christ, right? I don't know if you know this or not, but the only power that a lie has is if you believe it. Okay? That is the only power that a lie has. Okay? is if you believe it. If you believe a lie, that makes it powerful. If you don't believe a lie, it doesn't have any power. And so our process needs to start going into our lives, going into our thinking, going into our thought patterns, and start to uproot and unplug the power source of those lies, right? I want to uproot those lies, but I need to unplug their power source. What's the power source of a lie? If I believe it. And so I'm going to stop believing those lies. I'm going to uproot those lies, and it's a simple thing. How do you do that, Pastor Stephen? Well, I have this mantra. Say it with me. Ready? That's not true. Okay? Anytime, and I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you, okay, where you start spinning in your brain and you find yourself in a negative loop and you find your anxiety rising and your emotions deflating and you're in that loop, what you need to do is you just need to stop and pause, and any of those lies that you're allowing to swirl around, you just need to say, that's not true. That's not true. And there is power in that statement. That's not true. Anytime where I'm standing up here thinking, I'm looking at your faces and I'm thinking, man, I am just not doing it today as a pastor. I am not doing it as a preacher. This sermon is horrible. Hold on. That's not true. Okay? I have bad days as a teacher. I have bad days as a husband. I have bad days as a father. Any of you ever have bad days as wives or husbands or parents, right? And you start to believe lies. Man, I am such a bad parent. Hold on. That's not true. And we got to start unplugging the power source of those lies that we've allowed to fester in our brains. We got to get down there, all right? And so I want to help you today. I want to help you today to uncover some bad beliefs, okay? I want to help you uncover bad beliefs that you maybe have going on inside your brain. Kirk talked, I think it was last Sunday, about how this wasn't in his sermon. It was kind of in the in-between zone, right? After worship, just before announcements kind of thing. And he was talking about how he just feels like there's these strongholds that we've allowed to be in place. And he gave an opportunity to start to have strongholds broken off in our lives. But how many of you know that that's not a one Sunday adventure? That's a daily adventure, okay? It's not like I've got this stronghold in my brain and I come up and somebody lays their hands on me and suddenly that stronghold is gone. No, strongholds are destroyed by a daily choice to stop believing in the stronghold, okay? And it's not a one-trick pony. It's not a one-time fix. It's a life process of getting into this habit of uprooting and unplugging the power source of those lies that I've been believing. And so I've got 5 questions for you to help you with uncovering bad beliefs. Are you ready? Brace yourself. You might want to tighten your belt right now a little bit because these questions are not easy, all right? Question number 1. If I want to uncover bad beliefs, first question I need to ask is, what kind of fruit or what quality of fruit are these thoughts producing in my life? If fear and anxiety are rising and spirits are deflating, chances are it's a bad thought and a bad belief, okay? And I need to unplug it. I need to expose it. I need to rebuke it. And I need to make a conscious effort so that anytime it shows its measly face back in here again, you're out the door, buddy. Right? I'm going to boot it out, okay? But it's not a one quick fix, right? I'm going to keep examining the quality of fruit that the thoughts are producing. Question number 1, all right? That was the easiest one, all right? Here we go. Question number 2. Uncovering a bad belief. Think about it like this. Is this a place that I retreat to when I don't get my way? Anybody here ever not gotten your way with something? And you go into that little room and you, in your mind, and you just feel sorry for yourself and people better start feeling sorry for me, okay? Or they don't love me, right? Is this a place that I run to when I don't get my way? Or is it a base of operation for carrying out God's will? Okay? And so I've got to work on getting rid of these bad beliefs. And so I've got to expose them for what they are, bad beliefs. I got to uncover them, and I got to unplug them. All right, question number 2. Question number 3. Is this coming from a place that's been built on the promises of God? This thought that I'm thinking right now, is it coming from a place that's built on God's word and God's promises, or is it a place that's built on my insecurities and the hurts that I've experienced in my life? I'm going to ask myself that. Where is this thought coming from? Is it coming from God's promises, or is it coming from my insecurities of not being good enough, not being enough, not being what I think I should be, right? And it's this idea that if I see that, if I recognize that, the place that these thoughts are coming from, I can start to uncover them, which is going to allow me to unplug them, okay? Next question. Is this from a stronghold that has to be maintained by lies? In 2 Corinthians 10, which I already quoted verse 5, in verse 4, Paul writes about demolishing strongholds. Okay, and how strongholds are from the enemy. And the enemy, I don't know if you know this or not, but he's an accuser. All he's got in his bag of tricks is lies. Okay, that's the only weapon. I don't know if you know this or not. Okay, a lie is the only tool that Satan has. Okay, the only tool that Satan can use against you is a lie. And it's only effective if you believe it. Okay, and so he's going to be using these lies. And so is this thought coming from this fortress or this stronghold that I've got in my mind that's maintained by lies, or is it from a place that is sustained by God's truth, where I have to, in one sense, I have to keep believing lies in order for this to keep happening in my life, or is it God's truth that's sustaining it? Last question. Does this thought reveal God's character? Or does it reveal my sin nature? And as I start to look at the thoughts that I'm thinking, and I start to run them through this battery of 5 questions, ultimately what the goal is to start to uncover those bad beliefs so that I can unplug their power source. Okay? This must be heavy stuff. You guys are kind of just like, oof, oof, oof. Yeah, I know. Those aren't easy questions. Those aren't easy questions for me to write on paper, but they're definitely not easy questions for me to ask myself or for you to ask yourself, right? Okay? Hold on, it gets better, right? Because ultimately, I need to be thinking like this. If Jesus wouldn't think or imagine this thought, then neither should I. Okay? And that's the challenge. I mean, the 5 questions are the 5 questions there, but ultimately you could think this. All right, is this a thought that Jesus would think? Is this something? Is this an outcome? Anybody ever get stuck in a false narrative in your mind? I can't remember when you preached about that, Kirk Snazza, but that was a while back, I feel like, about just the narratives that we allow to play out in our mind sometimes, okay? When we go into autopilot mode and we're driving down the road and suddenly we're imagining going across the median and head into traffic, you know, and like where does that thought all of a sudden come from, right? Right? And asking yourself, would Jesus imagine this? Would Jesus think this thought? Okay? It's not what would Jesus do. Yes, that's important. But if I truly want to live the life that Jesus lived, I need to think the thoughts that Jesus thought. All right? Mental math. Oh, my goodness. Stephen, where are you going with this one, right? Remember, I'm a teacher. And I'm a math teacher, believe it or not. All right? But I teach junior kindergarten math, so it can't be that complicated, right? Okay? I don't know if you know this or not, but right equations yield or produce right answers, okay? A couple nights ago, Elliot and I were sitting at our dining room table. He was doing his math homework, and he got to a problem where they just gave him the equation, okay? And he said this. He said, they might as well just have given me the answer, right? Because they gave him the equation. He didn't have to think about what the equation was going to be. It was just right there, bam, ready for him to use. And it was this idea that right equations have the potential to produce right answers in math, right? Where am I going with this? Well, I kind of talked about it a little bit in my Minefield message, but it's this idea that we oftentimes have our thoughts based in wrong equations, okay? And so I want to riff on this for just a little bit, right? What do I mean by that? Wrong equations, we get this wrong in our life where we think that experience, because I experienced something, therefore it is true. False. Okay? Let me just say that. False. Just because you experience something does not mean it is true. Now, hold on if you're disagreeing with me. That's all right. Where we think experience is equal to truth, or we get to this point where we think our experience actually is greater than truth. I know that God's word tells me that he will never leave me nor forsake me, but I'm kind of feeling left and forsaken right now. And so that's my experience, and that's actually more true. You know, God actually isn't good. Okay? I know that God's word says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, but you know what? He's kind of feeling unloving right now, so he must be unloving. Okay? And we get locked into this idea, and we base our beliefs on these faulty equations, and wrong equations are going to produce wrong beliefs inside of me. Hold on. Right? So what are the right equations? Well, the right equations are that truth, only truth, is equal to truth. Okay? Only truth is equal to truth, and more than that, truth is greater than your experience every single day of the week and twice on Sundays. Okay? Truth must outweigh our experiences. What do I mean by that? Truth must outweigh our experiences. Well, just because you experience something, I'm going to go back to something I said. Just because you experience something doesn't mean it's true. Okay? Let me prove it. Okay? So I'm going to tell you about the game-losing shot. Okay? I was coaching junior high boys basketball, and we were playing in a tournament, I think in Summit, South Dakota, believe it or not. And just a stone's throw away from the Jorgensens. And so anyway, we're in this game, and in this tournament, we're in the championship game. It's been a great day. Kids have been playing really well, but we're down. And I think we were down by 1 second, down by 1 point with 1 second. Okay, like literally. And I had called a timeout right at the side, so we were going to have a side entry play, and so we called a timeout, drew up a play, and we were going to get the ball into our best player's hands. Okay, and just how you want it to be, right? Okay, and so game back on, right? We run the play. Okay, kids set their screens perfectly. Kid comes around open at the top of the key. Ball goes into his hands, shot goes up, and he missed it. Rimmed out. And in that moment, I had to find my way to find that kid, because he just experienced the game-losing shot, but he didn't lose the game. He didn't lose the game, and I needed for him to realize that he didn't lose the game. Well, he missed the shot, coach. You bet. That is part of his experience. He missed the shot. But the far greater truth is that he didn't lose the game in that moment. We lost the game. What did we do to get down by 1 point with 1 second left on the clock, right? There were many things that took place in the other 60 minutes of that game to get us in that situation, right? And so just because he experienced missing that shot, it doesn't mean that it's true that he lost the game, okay? Or maybe think about it like this. Just because you don't experience something doesn't mean that it's not true. We talked about this, Kirk and I did in one of our Wednesday night videos. I asked Kirk this. I said, is the sun shining? I asked him that. And right away he started to look, and then he kind of paused himself. Okay? Well, is the sun shining? Yes. But it's cloudy outside Maryland. It's just blocking it. I don't know if you know this or not, but the sun is always shining. The sun is physically incapable of not shining, right? There's never a point in the existence of the sun where it hasn't been shining. It is a big burning ball of plasma and gas. It's going to be shining, whether you see it or experience it or not. And that's the idea here, is that just because you don't experience something, that doesn't mean it's not true, okay? The sun is always shining. It is always shining. That is true. And so that doesn't make my experience, okay? It doesn't get my experience if the sun is being cloudy, or if it's being cloudy outside and it's being blocked, like Marilyn said. It doesn't mean that suddenly the sun isn't shining. Right? And it's this idea that we need to understand that our experiences, although real and although part of our life, they cannot become the basis for what we determine to be true in our life. Okay? Jesus talks about it like this in John 16:33. I don't know if you're familiar with John 16, but he's just got done telling the disciples about everything he's going to experience. The death, the resurrection, having to leave them here, going up into heaven. And he finishes that speech or that message to them with this. He says, I told you these things so that in me you may have peace. Wait a second, Jesus. You were just telling us that you're going to be beaten and hung on a cross and you're going to leave us here as you go into heaven. That doesn't sound like peace, right? That's the context of that statement. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace, because in this world you are gonna have trouble. In this world you're gonna face disappointment. In this world you're gonna have bad experiences. But the reality is, truth must outweigh those experiences to the point where we understand that life is going to be hard. That's a promise from Scripture. Life is going to be hard. But a better truth is, God will always be good. Life is going to be hard, but God will always be good. And so it got me thinking about this, about thought patterns or thinking patterns. And what do you base your beliefs on? Okay? And this is where I want to end today. But what do you base your beliefs on? Do you base your beliefs, what you believe to be true, is it more based in truth, or is it more based in your experiences? Well, we're in church, so obviously I'm supposed to say that my beliefs are based on truth. But the reality is, a lot of times we base our beliefs on our experiences. Okay? Let me try to talk this out for you, all right? So there's a great passage. Jesus used this. This is Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27. I want you to pay attention to something in this passage, all right? And he says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Okay, Judy prayed actually about the wise and foolish builders this morning in the prayer room. Thank you, Judy, for that. Okay, now look at what's underlined here. The rain came down, streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. Okay? He keeps going though. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. Take a look what happens. The rain came down, streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, and what happened? It fell with a great crash. Do you notice something in that? Both houses faced the same set of circumstances. Winds blew, waters rose, okay? Rain came down. Now, anytime you look for a depiction of this parable, it'll always be this showing of this house way up high on like a huge cliff, right? There's this one house way up high on this cliff and another house down on the seashore, right? Do you see that in the parable though? Does it say anything about the house being built on the cliff? Who's to say these houses weren't side by side? That's the reality. because we will go through the same set of circumstances as another person. We will go through experiences. We will have rain coming down. We will have streams rising. We will have winds blowing and beating against us. But what's going to determine whether or not my house crashes or stays up is this idea that it has to be, or I need to focus on where my foundation is at. Okay? Is it in the sand or is it on the rock? All right, let me try to explain it like this. All right, so a lot of times we follow what's called a sinking sand pattern in our beliefs. A sinking sand pattern, all right? What do I mean by that? Where we start with our beliefs being based or rooted in our experience, okay? And then when we do that, when we base it into our experience then determines our perspective. And then our perspective will then influence what we believe, and then what we believe suddenly becomes true. That is a sinking sand pattern of thinking that many of us, even believers in Christ, even people who sit in the church that I am standing here preaching in, even me, can get roped into doing. Where I start to create thought patterns that are based on that, where I root everything in my experience, which determines my perspective, which influences my beliefs, which determines what I think is true or not. And that is a faulty way of thinking. All right, think about it like this. Cheetos Paws. Anybody like Cheetos Paws? Cheetos Paws? They were popular in the 90s also. Okay, well, a good friend of mine, we were coming back from swimming lessons in Wahpeton. And a good friend of mine, he gave me some Cheetos Paws. He brought his lunch on the bus every single day home from swimming lessons. And I would always be starving after swimming lessons. So I'd be sitting there like waiting for him to decide if he was going to feed me or not, right? Okay, and so he's eating these Cheetos Paws, right? And I ate them. And I had like horrific vomiting experience, like projectile puke action happen. Okay? Now ask me if I eat Cheetos Paws anymore. No, that doesn't happen, right? Because of my experience. I ate those Cheetos Paws. I projectile vomited. I should try to re-eat them. You should make me put. Come on, preacher. Come on. Let's see you live this sermon out, right? But my experience was so bad that it determined my perspective that today, if Trisha were to tell me, hey, let's go get some Cheetos Paws, I'd say, no way, Jose, right? Because my belief is that Cheeto Paws are disgusting. And now my truth is, if I eat them again, guess what's going to happen? Right? You want to see it, don't you? You want to see it, right? And that's the sinking sand pattern that we all get roped into believing, where we have this experience, which now determines my perspective. Oh, man, that was bad. Oh, and now it's always going to be bad. And yeah, nothing from that can ever be good. And now this is my truth. And we are this wobbly tower stacked up on sand of our experiential, way of thinking, okay? And the idea is Jesus is coming against this pattern of thinking. He's saying, no. Hold on. How can it that two houses who have the same set of circumstances affect them? How can they have different outcomes? Well, it's because one builder is building his house on truth. And so I've got to build my thoughts or my beliefs on truth. I got to start with truth as my foundation, not my experiences. And so I lay this down. All right, so now that I've got truth where it needs to be, now on top of that, that truth then can influence my beliefs. What I believe is real, what I believe is going to happen, okay? Which then is going to affect my perspective and how I see things, which then is going to determine my experience, okay? Because I don't know if you know this or not, one of Kirk's favorite restaurants is Texas Roadhouse. True story. But did you know that Kirk's favorite restaurant wasn't always Texas Roadhouse? True story. True story, because Kirk went to Texas Roadhouse and he had a bad experience. Multiple bad experiences. Multiple. How many times was it? Five times? Oh my goodness, and some of you are ready to write a restaurant off after half of a bad experience, right? He had 5 bad experiences, but he knew in his heart of hearts that Texas Roadhouse was a good restaurant. And so his truth of believing that Texas Roadhouse is a good restaurant allowed him, even after 5 bad experiences, man, I have a new appreciation for you, buddy. After 5 bad experiences, he kept going back. He kept going back. He kept going back. And it's this idea that you are going to have bad experiences, right? The Bible is clear in that. It is clear in that. But take heart, take courage, for I have overcome every single one of your bad experiences. Because I don't know if you know this or not, Jesus had bad experiences. Beard ripped out, face spit on, punched while he was blindfolded. And guys were saying, prophesy, who hit you? Come on. That's a bad experience. But the truth of who he was and who God was outweighed those experiences every single time. Every single time. And so we've got to get into this firm foundation of making sure that my beliefs start with truth, which is going to interpret my beliefs or affect my beliefs, which then is going to change my perspective, which is then going to influence the experiences that I have. How is it that 2 builders face the same circumstances but have completely different outcomes? It's because one was rooted in God's truth and the other was rooted in the experiences of his life. And that is going to be the challenge for you and I to face every single day of the week, and even twice on Sundays, okay? And so if I want to get to living the life Jesus called me to live, I've got to start by thinking the way that Jesus thought. Lord, I